The entire conference room fell into a suffocating silence as the 12th interpreter slowly lowered her headset, her face drained of color and tight with quiet defeat. Around the polished glass table sat 12 highly paid professionals, each one armed with polished resumes, international certifications, and years of experience navigating diplomatic conversations across borders. Yet, one by one, they had tried, and one by one they had failed. On the massive digital screen mounted across the wall behind them, 8 foreign delegates watched with growing impatience. Their voices flowed rapidly in different languages, overlapping, colliding, and crashing into one another like storm waves hitting jagged rocks. What should have been a harmonious negotiation now sounded like chaos dressed in formality. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. The company's biggest international partnership, months of preparation, legal drafting, strategy meetings, and travel, was slipping away in real time. And at the back of the room, unnoticed by nearly everyone, stood a poor cleaning single father, holding a mop and a half-filled bucket of cloudy water. Daniel Reyes had learned early in life that pride did not feed a child. After his wife passed away unexpectedly from a sudden illness, the world he had built with careful hope collapsed overnight. Hospital bills swallowed their savings without mercy. The small apartment they once filled with laughter and late-night conversations grew painfully silent, echoing with absence instead of warmth. Every morning before the sun even thought about rising, Daniel woke quietly so he wouldn't disturb his 6-year-old daughter, Sophia. He prepared her breakfast with gentle care, making sure the toast wasn't burnt and the milk wasn't too cold. He braided her hair, clumsily at first, but better with time, after watching countless online tutorials late into the night. Then he walked her to school with a tired but steady smile that hid the exhaustion pressing against his bones. Afterward, he headed downtown to the towering glass building where he worked as a night cleaner. To most employees, Daniel was invisible. He moved silently through echoing hallways, emptying trash bins filled with discarded drafts of billion-dollar ideas, polishing marble floors that reflected the ambitions of executives who never noticed him, and wiping fingerprints off doors pushed open by people who had never once looked down to see who kept them shining. His uniform was plain, slightly faded with time, yet always spotless. He carried himself with humility, but inside him lived something no one in that building suspected, a mind sharpened by years of study, sacrifice, and an unbreakable determination to survive. Long before tragedy had struck his family, Daniel had been a language enthusiast. Growing up in a poor neighborhood filled with immigrants from every corner of the world, he had been surrounded by cultures, accents, and dialects that fascinated him. He learned Spanish from his grandmother's stories, English through school books he refused to put down, and French from an elderly neighbor who once taught literature before retirement. Mandarin came from a grocery store owner who allowed Daniel to help stock shelves after school in exchange for conversation. Arabic was picked up from evenings spent listening to international radio broadcasts while doing homework. Portuguese arrived through construction co-workers who joked loudly during breaks. German came from borrowed library tapes that he played until the plastic warped slightly. Japanese was taught by a college exchange student who had once needed help navigating the city, and found in Daniel a patient friend. Language became Daniel's escape, a bridge to worlds far beyond the cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights of his childhood. He had even earned a scholarship to study linguistics in college, a dream that promised possibility. But life intervened before dreams could take shape. When Sophia was born and his wife's health began to decline, Daniel dropped out to work full-time. Dreams were postponed. Responsibilities were not. On the day everything changed, Daniel had been assigned to clean the executive floor earlier than usual due to a high-profile international meeting. He had seen important gatherings before. Men in suits speaking in measured tones, assistants rushing with tablets and coffee, but nothing on this scale. Black cars lined the street outside. Security personnel stood watch at every entrance. Inside, the company's CEO, Margaret Whitmore, known for her icy composure and relentless ambition, was hosting delegates from 8 different countries to finalize what promised to be a groundbreaking global partnership. But something had gone terribly wrong. The company's primary interpreter had fallen ill at the last minute. Backup interpreters were urgently called in. One by one, they attempted to handle the increasingly complex technical discussions unfolding across the table. But the problem wasn't simply translation. It was nuance. The delegates weren't just speaking different languages. They were expressing cultural subtleties, legal intricacies, financial sensitivities, and industry-specific terminology that demanded far more than textbook fluency. Misinterpretations began piling up. Frustration mounted. Voices sharpened beneath polite smiles. A Brazilian delegate slammed his folder shut in irritation. A German investor leaned back, shaking his head with visible doubt. A Japanese executive slowly removed his glasses, a quiet but unmistakable signal of disapproval. Margaret Whitmore felt her empire trembling. Daniel was wiping the glass wall outside the conference room when he heard it, a phrase spoken in Mandarin. The interpreter rendered it as a rejection of proposed terms. But Daniel knew, instantly, that it meant something entirely different. It was a polite request for clarification, carefully framed to preserve mutual respect without causing embarrassment. His hand froze mid-motion. He tried to ignore it. It wasn't his place. He was a cleaner, not a consultant. But then he heard the Arabic delegate respond, his tone tense, his words clearly misunderstood in translation. Daniel's chest tightened. Years of listening, studying, and loving languages told him this conversation was spiraling toward disaster. Inside the room, Margaret's voice grew strained as she called for yet another interpreter. That made 12. When the 12 failed to restore order, a heavy silence settled across the conference table. The silence of collapsing opportunity. And before fear could convince him otherwise, Daniel gently knocked on the open conference door. Every head in the conference room turned toward the door. The sight of a janitor standing at the threshold of a multi-million-dollar negotiation felt almost absurd. Daniel's uniform contrasted sharply against tailored suits and silk ties. His mop still rested against the wall behind him, his bucket at his side, like an anchor to the reality he was about to disrupt. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. He explained respectfully, quietly, that he believed there had been a misunderstanding in the translation. Security shifted uneasily, ready to escort him out without hesitation. Margaret Whitmore stared at him, disbelief flickering across her usually composed expression. But desperation has a way of making even the proud reconsider impossible options. After a tense pause, she allowed him 60 seconds. No more. Daniel stepped forward, not with arrogance, but with calm humility. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried a steady clarity that seemed to settle into the room like quiet rain. He began in Mandarin. He clarified the original phrase with precision and cultural sensitivity, explaining that it had not been a rejection, but a respectful request for further detail. The delegate's expression changed instantly, from irritation to surprise. Then Daniel shifted seamlessly into Arabic, explaining the intended meaning behind the earlier response and smoothing the rising tension that had begun to fracture the conversation. He moved into Portuguese to address a financial concern, then German, refining a contractual nuance that had been misrepresented. French followed naturally as he acknowledged regulatory conditions that had caused hesitation. He navigated Japanese honorifics with careful respect, ensuring no one felt slighted or diminished in exchange. Spanish and English anchored the entire dialogue, bridging tone and tension across the widening gap that had nearly swallowed the deal whole. Something in the room changed. What had been chaos became clarity. What had been hostility softened into cooperation. Delegates leaned forward instead of away. Headsets were quietly removed and placed on the table. For the first time that day, genuine understanding replaced polite frustration. Margaret watched in stunned silence. The man who cleaned her office floors every night was orchestrating linguistic harmony with the confidence of a seasoned diplomat. There was no hesitation in his voice, no frantic search for notes or references. His translations carried empathy, intelligence, and balance, the kind that only comes from lived experience rather than memorized vocabulary. Minutes stretched into an hour into 2, and by the time the final terms were reviewed, adjusted, and agreed upon, the deal was not only salvaged, it was strengthened. Delegates who had arrived prepared to walk away now expressed sincere gratitude toward the remarkable multilingual mediator who had stepped in when no one else could. Several insisted on exchanging business cards with Daniel. He shyly admitted he didn't own any. When the room finally emptied, exhaustion hit him like a crashing wave. His knees felt weak, his hands suddenly unsure where to rest. He expected a polite thank you before being directed back toward his mop and bucket. Instead, Margaret asked him to sit down. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a background figure moving through reflections of glass and marble, but as a human being with extraordinary depth. She asked about his education, his life, how he had acquired such mastery over so many languages. Daniel spoke honestly, without embellishment. He explained how he had left college when Sophia was born, how he worked nights, and sometimes days, just to keep the lights on, how he studied languages after his daughter fell asleep, because learning reminded him that the world was still bigger than his grief. Margaret felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. Humility. The following week, Daniel received an offer that would change his life forever. The company created an entirely new position for him, International Communications Specialist. It came with a salary he had never imagined earning, health benefits for both him and Sophia, flexible hours so he could continue caring for his daughter without fear of losing everything again. When he told Sophia, she didn't understand contracts or corporate titles. She only saw the tears in her father's eyes and knew something beautiful had happened. She hugged him tightly and whispered that she always knew he was the smartest person in the world. Daniel's first day in his new office felt surreal. The same hallways he once cleaned now echoed with greetings directed at him. Some employees felt embarrassed for never noticing him before. Others felt quietly inspired by the reminder that brilliance does not always announce itself loudly. Daniel treated everyone with the same respect he always had, from security guards to senior executives. He knew exactly how it felt to be unseen. Months later, during another international summit, Daniel entered the conference room through the front door for the first time, wearing a simple but well-fitted suit. The delegates recognized him immediately. There were smiles, nods of respect. He didn't stand at the back anymore. And yet, he never forgot where he started. On weekends, he volunteered at community centers, teaching free language classes to immigrants and underprivileged children. He told them that knowledge was something no one could take away, no matter how small your paycheck or how invisible you felt. Margaret Whitmore often reflected on that disastrous meeting that had almost cost her everything. She realized the greatest failure that day had not been linguistic. It had been perceptual. They had overlooked brilliance simply because it wore the uniform of poverty. Daniel's journey became a quiet legend within the company, not because he sought fame, but because the story reminded everyone that talent does not always arrive in tailored suits. Sometimes it waits patiently behind closed doors, holding a mop, hoping for a chance. Years later, when Sophia graduated from high school with honors in international studies, Daniel sat in the audience remembering that terrifying day outside the conference room. He realized that the greatest victory hadn't been the promotion or the salary. It had been proving to his daughter that dignity and hard work and belief in oneself can rewrite destiny. The world often measures worth by titles, clothing, and bank accounts, but real greatness hides in perseverance, in late-night studying after exhausting shifts, in showing up every day for your child, even when your heart is broken. 12 interpreters failed that day not because they lacked education, but because true understanding requires more than vocabulary. It demands empathy, patience, and lived experience. The poor cleaning single dad possessed all three. And in the end, it wasn't just a business deal that was saved. It was a reminder to a room full of powerful people and to all of us that the next miracle might be standing quietly in the corner, waiting for someone brave enough to listen.